Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses, and this is Tradition by Allan M. Campbell, FRC, an article taken from Rosicrucian Digest, Volume 42, Number 8, August 1964. Allan M. Campbell, FRC Deputy Grand Master of Great Britain. Tradition. The word tradition is described as the handing down of unwritten opinions or practices. I wish to deal with this subject not so much in its stricter or dictionary definition, but rather as the flow of knowledge from time immemorial, expressing itself in many forms in the history of man's evolution. It could be taken as the light, which at times has appeared to be almost extinguished and at others has flared into sudden brilliance from hidden sources. Religionists have crystallized its manifestations and expansions in their many allegories, indicating the conscious aspiration of man to live in its effulgence. Such accounts as the Garden of Eden and the story of Genesis are taken by many students to symbolize the birth of consciousness and its development within man. The Kabbalah, which means tradition, tells us that at the fall of man, the knowledge of the return was passed to Adam by the archangel Metatron. Such is the tradition of light which has been preserved in the secret conclaves of mankind through the ages and carefully guarded from the profane. In its more mundane aspects, our traditional patterns of behavior have always reflected the inner, or at least have tried to preserve a knowledge of it. The nursery rhymes and fairy tales taught from generation to generation are a good example. It is often said, and it is probably true, that the peoples of the United Kingdom are influenced more than most by traditional patterns. If something is done more than twice, it is jokingly said to have become a tradition. Europe in general is looked upon by many as so hemmed in by traditional outmoded patterns as to manifest a negation in the life of the people as something that holds us too rigidly to a set standard of behavior. America manifests the antithesis of this, although generally sentimentally attached to the tradition of the older countries, seeing in old things a crystallization of past history and symbols of this attachment. A positive aspect of traditional behavior is that it tends to hold a society in an almost unconscious identification and unity, when all apparent ties have been broken. This almost indefinable will to act from a sense of tradition has often saved Britain as a nation. The world, looking on a sorely devastated Britain during the last war, wondered what kept her together and what indomitable spirit forced her to exist under stresses that should have caused her disintegration. This persistence of traditional behavior has been noted by many students of sociology. The great communist theorist Karl Marx analyzed the failure of the Paris Commune of 1871 as being of this kind. Thereafter, communist theories incorporated the concept of the destruction of the state, so that the basis for the return of such behavior patterns was destroyed. The winds of change are felt in nearly every facet of our lives today and are reflected in the breakup of many traditionally accepted patterns of behavior, whether these be political or religious. This is an extremely unstable period since few adapt themselves easily to new ways of life. The rapid changes which scientific techniques have brought to the economy of nations and the consequent relationships of one to another have made for broader concepts. Traditions embracing narrow national needs and boundaries are archaic and inadequate to meet man's expanding consciousness. They speak for an historical past when nationalism may have been a necessity for incubating ideas that would ultimately break the shell of such narrow and stifling limitations. It is a dangerous point that we have reached in our evolution, with a control of nature undreamed of in conjunction with a consciousness that has about it much of the law of the jungle yet to be sublimated. It is a shattering conjunction which has found many of the traditional patterns too weak to contain the stresses placed on them. It is a razor's edge which many cannot walk. There is an expansion horizontally in many places, and shallow palliatives are sought in all sorts of bizarre religions and cults too reminiscent of the Roman scene before its fall. Spiritually, on a scale unprecedented, man is faced with the eternal question of the meaning of existence and his relationship with God or the cosmic scheme of creation. Fear is the spur to escapism and forgetfulness, whether it be through drugs or the many mental aberrations, which cut one off from the flow of being and a balanced adjustment to life. Tremendous strides in modern technology towards automation have, or will have before long, released man from the slavery of time in a material sense. Computers and machine programming have reduced his necessary labor and increased his leisure. This is one of the greatest problems presented to our age: what to do with this leisure. Is it to be solved by the escapist time consumers or the concentration on one's own unexplored self? To meet the need of our times, the traditional safeguard and guide, the Church, has drastically altered its pattern. Many contend that even such alterations do not meet the needs. However, in Europe, we do not easily accept the surface expansion leading to new and unsatisfying cults. We stick to our traditional bulwarks and go back searching our roots for that which will lead us out of the spiritual impasse in which we find ourselves. Radical alterations in thinking have become necessary to meet the new demands. More and more, man is forced to grapple within himself with the problems he thought lay outside. Such are the changes facing him today, changes which force him uneasily from long-established traditional patterns of orthodox routines. Periods of crisis. There have been periods of great crisis in the past, and the development of our Western civilization has witnessed many. With the growth of culture in Egypt and the establishment of the great schools of knowledge, there developed secret springs of knowledge, which were to nurture the growth of nations and cultures for centuries to come. During the period of Akhenaten, the traditional first Grand Master of the Rosicrucian order, the concept of the rose and the cross was extant. He placed these words on papyrus in the year 1360 BC. Suffering is the golden cross upon which the rose unfoldeth. The symbol of the rose and cross has become one of the greatest symbols known to man, the cross representing the body upon which the rose or soul unfolds. From the schools of ancient Egypt, the knowledge of nature and man flowed in two main channels, one known as the Therapeuti in Greece and the other the Essenes in the Middle East. Such knowledge gave Greece its cultural greatness and was the source of some of the greatest philosophical thinking the world has produced. The Essene Brotherhood projected this knowledge into early Christian life. Such knowledge did not perish but passed at the fall of one culture into another. It was presented in many strange ways, particularly in symbolism and ritual, a cypher understood only by those initiated into its interpretation. For a long time, the Arab world carried the inheritance which later passed into Europe in the form of alchemy and other cults. The early disputations in the Church did not suppress it entirely, and from the Essenes it was carried by Gnostic and so-called heretical streams. When Europe, after the fall of Rome, had been gradually isolated and the ancient knowledge lost, it was kept alive in the East. Charlemagne, king of France in the 9th century, sent the philosopher Arnaud to the Middle East to bring back the light. In 804, at Languedoc, he established a lodge of the Illuminated Ones to be a secret see of the Rosicrucians for centuries. Later, the Crusaders acted as a tinderbox to Europe. Knightly orders arose which sometimes pursued ends independent of those of the Church. The Knights Templar could be taken as an example. From its founding by Hugh de Payens in 1119 at the Temple in Jerusalem, it rose from a very poor order to be one of the wealthiest in Christendom and the envy of avaricious princes of state and church. Despite calumny, lies, deceit, and the martyrdom of its Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, its noble traditions still live. One can be with the Templars in spirit in the surroundings of the temple off Fleet Street amid all their heraldic emblems. The arts of printing and papermaking found their way into Europe through this stream of traffic from the East. Realizing the tool it would be in the hands of the heretical sects then settling around the areas of Toulouse in southern France, the Church endeavored to suppress the spread of such a medium. It did not succeed in suppressing it altogether, but it did perpetrate one of the greatest massacres of Christian history on the sects known as the Albigenses. Count Raymond of Toulouse sought to give his protection, but to no avail. The massacre was most thorough, but the knowledge was not lost and passed into other channels. England's greatest son. We are brought nearer home to our own traditional background when we touch upon the history of one of the greatest of England's sons, Sir Francis Bacon. He stands at the beginning of our era, indeed at the very centre of those developments which were to lay the foundations of our modern way of life, a pioneer of the sciences and of all knowledge, having his eyes to the future while reassessing the ancient knowledge. At a very early age, he was visualizing great schemes for the uplift of humanity. At the age of 15, he left Cambridge University, disillusioned with the dry discussions, which centered around the teachings of Aristotle, at that time considered the alpha and omega of all knowledge. His resolve to set new schemes for the improvement of man's estate gave birth to the idea of his great instauration, which was to demand all of his great genius and occupy the whole of his life. However, his first task was to create an English language. Latin was the accepted language of the universities, French that of the court. When he visited France as a member of the diplomatic train of Amyas Paulet in the year 1576, an example of a similar project came before him. The name of the Pleiades was still extant, a group of 7 young men under Ronsard who had set themselves the task of reforming the French language and had successfully established a strong literary tradition. It was in France that Bacon was initiated into the traditional esoteric stream of knowledge. One author states that he was initiated into the Order of the Knights Templar. We know that he was introduced to the cypher code of the Albigenses. A direct indication of the association made then with the stream of esoteric knowledge was symbolized in the allegorical figure of Christian Rosenkreuz. It is of interest that the advertisement called the Fama Fraternitatis, requesting the learned of Europe to come to the order, was issued in 1614 under the name of CRC. It is significant also that the literary forge in which the English language was shaped began to function diligently after Bacon's return from France. Many works began to appear, and literary controversy arose in books bearing the seals of the Rosy Cross Literary Group. If one researches deeply into the history of the period, one finds many threads in this great Elizabethan Renaissance that lead to the imperator of the Rosicrucian order, Sir Francis Bacon. His great muse was Pallas Athena, goddess of wisdom, the spear shaker. His was the vision that laid vast foundations of learning which have borne much fruit. From the invisible college sprang the Royal Society, of which one prominent Rosicrucian member, Sir Isaac Newton, could say that he saw further than other men because he stood on the shoulders of giants. The plans Bacon laid and the traditions he established have served and continue to serve humanity well. It is left for other countries to evaluate his genius as the first modern philosopher and the father of modern scientific research. He's often blamed for what science has since done and for the divorced attitude which science has adopted to other than empirical approaches to life. However, his vision, although encompassing greater and greater control of nature by man through his ever-increasing knowledge, always set the purpose or ends as the glorification of God. The impasse which our civilization has reached today is the increased control of natural forces without the purpose of man's nearer approach to God. By this, I do not mean the approach to some anthropomorphic or external concept of God, but the subjective experience of the cosmic consciousness, a growth towards the mystical marriage or hieroagamos of the alchemists as expressed in the symbol of the rosy cross. As never before, man must be directed to look within, to understand himself, and to recapture the meaning of the ancient temple motto, "Know thyself." The Rosicrucian traditions. Throughout its history, the aims of the Rosicrucian order have been the same, although their expression has differed with the changing times. Matter is subservient to the higher cosmic pattern. It is the soil upon which man as a cosmic plant unfolds, the cross of matter upon which the soul evolves. If man is subservient to his lower self, he is a slave to the changing conditions of matter. He has to evolve those potentialities which make him more than man, the potentialities of his soul or God quality represented by the rose on the cross. Toward this end, the Rosicrucian order still strives. The inner traditional quest for light is still the same, although outer forms may have changed to meet the changing conditions of man's estate. The work of the order is constantly expanding to embrace all the nations. Its teachings are well suited for such a task, since they are non-sectarian as far as religious beliefs are concerned and non-political in social life. Its aim and purpose is the same as it has always been, to initiate men and women into the stream of light. Its tradition is a noble one, and thousands are proud to carry it forward. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.